Hello and welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today we're going to round out the discussions of Peggy's cosmetic work and also obviously all her restoration work with a discussion about the last thing that I have done to finish her off, which happened this weekend. Now, with a lot of the work that we've had done, it's been a case of I wanted to keep as much of Peggy as I could Peggy, but equally it was a case of if something was going to let the rest of the restoration down, or it was going to need doing in the next couple of years and therefore would mean taking parts of the car apart, then it was done at the time. So there was a lot of decisions such as that, particularly with things like the welding. There were parts of the floor, for example, that probably could have held up a little bit longer, but it was a case of whilst we were cutting everything else out, it made sense to pop that on the to-do list. Equally, there was parts of the sills that was fine, but would probably need doing in a few years' time. So that was all done as well. Today's discussion is mostly about Peggy's interior, and the interior is an interesting one because, as I have definitely confirmed this weekend, most of her interior, well, all of her interior was her original interior, bar the door straps that I've replaced since I've had her. Everything is kind of as she came out of the factory, the door cards, the back seats and stuff like that. Even the carpets, when she went in for restoration, were her original carpets. Unfortunately, the carpets were definitely beyond repair, and they would have let the rest of the car down, and that was the decisions that I was going to have to make. I wanted to keep stuff, but I didn't want it to let the car down. So the carpets came out, and I went for red carpets because I thought if I'm replacing it, I want it to match the rest of what I've done with the car, but also red shows up kind of muck and dirt a little bit less than a baby blue colour, so it seems like it might last a little bit longer, although obviously the last ones lasted really well, but it might last quite well with everything else. So we went for red Newton commercial carpets. But when it came to the seats, I played around with a lot of different options. Initially, I was thinking, actually, maybe I need a whole new interior, and if I'm going for a whole new interior, what would be my dream Morris Minor interior from the interiors that already existed? And it would probably be the red and white duotone. It's a fantastic thing, and I wish they'd kept it because it adds quite a lot of style to the interior of a Morris Minor. And I looked at kind of what I could get for making the interior red and white duotone, but it felt like a lot of replacing of things that didn't necessarily need replacing. The back seats have hardly been used. I've recently put some new padding in the back seats as well, so they are reasonably comfortable for the odd time that somebody sat in the back, but for the majority of the time they're fine, and that's why they've held up so well. The door cards again are fine. I asked Ian when they were out whether he thought there was too much water damage or anything that meant that they wouldn't survive going back in, and he thought that they were, considering especially the condition of the rear where the water would get in through the wheel arches, that they were some of the better ones that he'd seen, so they were perfectly fine to go back in. They could probably do with a real deep clean at some point if I wanted them to really shine up, but I think they look perfectly fine and perfectly serviceable. The only real weakness with Peggy's interior was always the front two seats. The front seats were cut up in places, ripped in places. They'd had some kind of bodge repairs, and I'd always found my seat reasonably comfortable, but Jamie had found the passenger seat somewhat uncomfortable. So I think the main area of kind of issue was those. And for a lot of my ownership, I've ended up covering the front seats with beach towels that had been fashioned into seat covers. That meant that the seats didn't get you quite so sweaty, because vinyl can do that, but also hid any of the issues with the seats being ripped and things like that, and often tied into the theme of the car. So initially I had a set of Captain America seat covers made from beach towels from the Disney store, and then I bought some Union Flag beach towels when they got a bit tired and worn out, and turned those into seat covers as well. I think it was my sister that did most of the work on those, because that was before I'd got handy with a sewing machine, and they did a great job. They really worked for what I needed, and made the car very serviceable, and hid the seats. But again, it was a case of, was that going to match the rest of the car now that the car had had all of its work done? And I realised probably not. So I then looked into, okay, what are my options for just the 2 front seats? And you can go on to Newton Commercial and you can get 2 front seat squabs for around 400 odd pounds. They're about £95 a top, £95 a bottom, and then obviously double that for your 2 seats in the front. Plus then all of the padding and straps that it makes sense to do if you're taking the seats apart, and especially after I took my seats apart, I realised just how bad they were. So it was a case of, right, that's quite a big investment, perhaps look for some better quality second-hand ones. And I didn't really come across any. And I think, again, this is a thing where if I had had a big, long wait period with lots of auto jumbles, maybe 5 or 6 years of time between deciding that this is what was happening with Peggy and getting the work done, I would have had more time to kind of peruse my options. But I didn't. So I looked into other options. And last November, my friend Natasha had had some front seats done for her Beetle. She'd previously had the rear seat done because her seats had got quite damaged when the car had gone in for restoration at a place that ended up being not so trustworthy, and had left kind of a lot of the interior just sat out in the rain. And so she had gone for some back seat covers at one point, and then some front seat covers in the kind of September, October time of last year, just in time for her car being on the stand in November at the Women Driver Social Club. Her seat covers were not just bought standard or whatever. She found an upholstery guy that did VW seats and things like that, and got them custom done. And essentially what she did is she took the cover off of her passenger seat, covered it up with a towel for the time being, sent it off to him. He used that as a pattern, and then sent her 2 new covers to fit. And she also got some door cards done by him, because a lot of Beetle door cards are all quite unique and different. They might have pockets in them for maps, or they might have speakers in them and things like that. So he does those as well, so she got them done as well. And I think all in all it came to a pretty reasonable amount, considering the amount of work that must have gone into drafting and making a pattern from a cut-up seat. So I thought, well, that could work for Peggy. I could have basically whatever I wanted, and then send off a pattern. He could make it fit the seats, and we'd be all good. So I messaged him and said, my friend Natasha had her seats done. Would you be able to do Morris Minors? And he says, I've not done Morris Minors, but I have done Minis before, so I can't see an issue in having a go. You'll just have to send me the things. And I said, great. And also, would you be able to make them a little bit different? Because we'd seen some examples online of the kind of the whole of the bit that you put your back and your bottom on being fabric. And so I was like, oh, we could try something like that, or we could try something like I ended up going for, which is just the centre bit being fabric, to try and reduce, again, the amount of sweatiness vinyl can create, which when you're dailying a car can be quite important. You don't want to turn up to places in the summer feeling all sweaty and horrible from your seats. So he was like, yeah, absolutely, do you have any idea about what sort of thing that you're looking for? And so I told him a bit about Peggy, told him a little bit about the colour scheme that I've got going, and I said, I don't want to go out and pick a fabric and you say that won't be strong enough to do upholstery with, so that's the theming. If you find something and send it to me, I will say yes or no. And so he found this fabric that we've got on, which is like lots of little Union flags all kind of crossing over each other. So from a distance it kind of looks like red, white and blue flecks, but as you get closer you can kind of see that it's actually Union flags. And I thought that's perfect, ties in with the rest of the car and everything, and absolutely great. So he said, great, I'll get started on that. So I think I messaged him around when the car went in for restoration, and he had a few projects on at the time, but then kind of got started with it mid-June, I think. So I knew that the seats weren't going to be ready for when the car was finished, but that wasn't too much of an issue because the seats are pretty easy to get out yourself and switch them up and then pop them back in again. So not a huge problem there. So I said, let's go, let's get those ordered. So he started work on them, took apart a squab. I was really fortunate that Ian, when I told him what was happening, said, oh well, I've got a shed full of old seat covers and things that I've taken off cars that have been restored that are just sat there. You can leave the covers on your seats and just send him one of those to work from. So I was like, great, that means that when I get the car back it will have its seat covers on, and I can then just do the change when the parts arrive. So that was really useful for me, but obviously taking a seat cover off and perhaps covering it over for the time being might have worked, although the state of Peggy's seats underneath, it would have been quite a messy thing to just have sitting exposed in the car, but we'll get to that. So the seat covers arrived just before the women's weekender last weekend. I think they arrived on the Wednesday or the Thursday, and they had cost me £200 plus £10 postage. So when you think about the fact that the Newton commercial covers were going to cost me nearly £400, it ended up costing me half that, which then gave me all of the leftover money to put into anything that the seats needed to make them more comfortable underneath. So I went on and ordered some new bottom seat padding and some new straps and some new clips as well. I didn't order any back seat padding because the only padding that they sell is the horsehair and things like that would be original, obviously, but isn't necessarily the most comfortable thing you could pad the back with. And I thought, well, the bottom foam on both of the seats looks like it's been replaced. It might be a bit squashed for sitting on, but I can probably put it in the back, see how that goes, and if I need to switch it, then it's not a huge thing to change at a later date. So saved myself a bit of money there as well, I suppose. And I have to thank some of the young members who have already done seat cover swaps and seat repaddings and things like that in the past, because I was able to double check with them what sort of things I'd actually needed and what sort of things were kind of would be nice for this. So that all arrived last week, and I was then able to do the work on Saturday. So I started by taking the seats out of the car, and unfortunately it was a horrifically rainy day for August, bank holiday on the Saturday. So I pulled the car out, took the seats out, but then had to bring the seats inside to do the work. And the best place for that was my lounge, which unfortunately has a very lovely fluffy rug on the floor, which I very quickly, once I started to pull things away and realised just how much some of the interior stuff had started to degrade, that I was going to need a tarpaulin to put underneath for the dismantling process at least. So I went and grabbed the tarpaulin from out in the garage and started pulling it apart, and it is quite an easy process to take apart your seats, and there's a lot of very useful videos online. I think I used a video called by a site called Work in Progress on YouTube that had done his traveller's seats, and that was really useful to give me an idea of what to expect. But he also did a far more kind of complete long-term job than I did. I was doing a let's get these in and fitted job because I need the car. If you've got the other cars and you've got other opportunities to drive other vehicles, then taking a car off the road and repainting the frame, really stripping the frame back and things like that might well be a worthwhile job doing, but it wasn't something that was going to be visible, wasn't something that was massively going to bother me, and seemed like a worthwhile just get it done sort of situation. What really surprised me was that the backs of the seats were never replaced from factory. They were exactly as was, and were kind of noticeable in that they were quite dilapidated and tired looking. The horsehair and stuff inside, the wadding was just kind of falling apart in your hands, and the webbing strapping that goes across the back felt like kind of dog rawhide tubes. It really wasn't the most pleasant feeling situation, but it did surprise me just how far gone the backs have gone, because like I said, I'd found the seats reasonably comfortable on long journeys, so I couldn't believe kind of just how sagged in and struggling they were. The first seat came apart very easily, and I managed to get it together reasonably smoothly, and my plan of moving the bottom padding up to the top worked quite well. And halfway through doing that seat, my dad arrived to drop off a few extra bits of foam that he'd had left over from doing a seat that he'd done in Lulu, the Singer Chamois, in case I needed any extra bits and or wadding and things like that to help bulk out the seats, but it seemed to go reasonably well. I then got the driver's seat out, and considering I felt that the driver's seat was the better of the two in terms of comfort, sitting that next to the newly upholstered passenger seat was quite surprising, and also sitting on one and then sitting on the other really shows you the difference swapping a bit of padding and elastic straps out can do. It was quite surprising and really showed how worthwhile it was for for me to make the change. The seats did look slightly different coloured. He'd obviously done as good a colour match as was possible with the vinyl, but also my front seats were very dirty and had never really cleaned up very well. It does match the rest of the interior quite well, all things considered. So I was quite happy about that. Now the second seat, again, came apart quite well, and I was surprised to find that in the bottom half there was the foam padding had kind of crisscrossed itself a little bit. It was fine again to carry on using, but someone had gone, oh, this is crisscrossed a little bit, let's get one of those kind of patio seat cover things that you tie to seats or to wooden dining seats, and that'll fix the problem. And it clearly hadn't fixed the problem, but it was quite surprising to find that in there and to find that it was in a worse condition than the passenger seat. Also, as I was pulling off the top part of the seat cover, a little bit of like newspaper, like loads of bits fell out, like Allen keys and all sorts of weird stuff, but a tiny little slip of paper fell out, and I was like, I don't even know how I spotted it, I don't even know how I noticed it, but I noticed this little bit of paper fall out, and it had like some classic car cutting on the back of it, so I was like, oh, it must be out of a classic car newspaper or something, and I wonder what it is. And I turned it over and I realised that it was the advert from one of the classic car newspapers for Peggy when she was for sale by the second owner, which I think was around 2004. And I couldn't believe it, and I was like, that's been sat in the seat, kind of wedged down the back of it for 20 years. The paper and stuff is still readable, and the phone number on it is still readable, so I might drop them a little text and be like, hey, I think you used to own my car, would love to have a chat with you, because obviously it was sold in Peterborough, so it would be good to kind of show them the car now and talk to them about how the car came to them, because in that listing the gearbox is in, the brake servo's in, a lot of the modifications that I assumed had come a little bit later were in by the time that second owner was selling her. So they've been in a long time and been part of her character for a long time. So I am intrigued to find out whether they were things that the car came to him with, or whether they were things that he'd added in part of her restoration work that he'd done. Well, getting her back on the road work that he'd done. But it was quite a gold mine. I pulled it out and I couldn't believe what it was, and I think it's almost better than finding money or whatever stuck down the back. I assume that it was perhaps in the pocket or the wallet of owner number 3, because that's the advert that they had used to perhaps find the car, and it had just fallen out their pocket down the back of the seat to be found by me years later, which is a really bizarre little time capsule, I think. But again, putting the seat back together, moving the foam up has made a huge difference, and then it was time to fit the seats back into the car and get the full effect, and it's a massive difference. I sent pictures of the side-by-side of the two seats to Natasha and some other young members and things, and said, I can't believe what a difference this has made. And a lot of them joked about the fact that I might have to adjust my mirrors, and genuinely, when I sat in the car that evening to take the car out, I did have to adjust some of my mirrors, because I'm sat so much higher and can kind of see further over the bonnet. It's a really bizarre change to have happened, and I'm fully expecting that these seats will bed in a little bit, and I might need to take the seats back out to retighten the vinyl and things over the seats once things have bedded in a little bit. But it's been so surprising. The seat belts that I've just fitted are kind of right at the end of their extension, really, so I am going to have to look into longer things for down on the floor to be able to kind of get a bit more movement back. But it's amazing, and they look fantastic. I really like the fabric bit that we've put in there. I think it really ties in with the rest of the car. It means that she doesn't just look like another Morris Minor on the inside. She really ties into the rest of it. It matches the steering wheel and everything else, and yeah, it's just fantastic. I'm really pleased with how they've turned out, and Jonathan at Transmission Classics, which is the company that I use, you can find them on Facebook, did an absolutely fantastic job with my Morris Minor seats for the first time, and I'm sure would be willing to do more if you too were looking for either something a little bit different or something perhaps a little bit cheaper than Newton Commercial, but still to a very good quality. They wouldn't necessarily be the pressed in version, I think, that you get with Newton Commercial, so they might not be accurate if you want them to kind of match the back seats in that way. I think they would be stitched ribbing, but it's a really nice quality product, and the seat is so comfortable, and the fabric area is just kind of right for not feeling too warm whilst you're sat in it, because we took the car out lovely sunny Sunday this bank holiday to Classics by the River by Quest Brothers at the Pike and Eel, and had a fantastic time. Got to see a lot of familiar faces and catch up with some people, and they all thought the seats looked fantastic, and we didn't feel too warm sitting on them. It is very, very bizarre in how it's changed the driving of the car, but I am getting used to it. So for example, my legs are sometimes a little bit closer to the parcel shelf than they were before, and the gear stick feels a little bit different because it's a little bit lower, but yeah, it's been interesting, but a massive improvement, and I think really finishes off everything that Peggy deserved to have done to her, and it means that I can enjoy her with full pride of the front seats and everything now, and really enjoy displaying her once again. So I hope you enjoyed hearing about the seat swap in Peggy and finishing off all of her work. Like I said, Transmission Classics, you can find them on Facebook. It's like a little blue Carmen Gear, I think it is, on his logo. They're based up in Cumbria, but we did everything via post, and it's worked really well. And equally, if you own other classics, he might well be able to try something from your collection and make it fit to yours if you're willing to kind of have a go at fitting it yourself. And he's offered me some more advice via Facebook once I posted the pictures about getting some of the further wrinkles and stuff out when I try and tighten them off again in perhaps a few weeks. But that's it for today. Thank you ever so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Drive safely and happy motoring.